Hey gang, and welcome back. These videos are brought to you by Card Conduit, the best place to sell your unused collection fast and easily. 401 Games, Canada's top shop for all your hobby and TCG needs. Dragon Shield, the strongest sleeves for your strongest decks. And Moxfield, the easiest way to store and share your deck lists. I win the die roll and start us off. I draw, play a forest, and pass the turn. Kuzno has got a Reliquary Tower, and he taps it for a colorless and casts Soul Ring. Desmond's first turn has him playing a Verdant Catacombs, sacrificing it, losing 1, and going to find an overgrown tomb. Eric plays a Cavern of Souls, naming angels as it comes in, and passes. I play a Cabaret Courtyard, which sacrifices itself and gains me 1 life, and I go to find a forest card from my library. Kuzno also has a forest, and casts Farseek, going to find a land as he passes turn. Desmond has his own Reliquary Tower, and pays 2 for a Sylvan Library. Eric draws, plays a Vault of Champions, and then plays out Giada. I've got a forest, surprise surprise, and just pass after that. Kuzno plays a Tropical Island, and then taps enough for Miss Bumbleflower. During his end step, I cast Harrow, sacrificing a forest to go and find 2 more. Desmond uses his Sylvan Library ability on his draw step, but keeps no extra cards. He plays a forest for turn, and then casts Arwen, Weaver of Hope. She enters, and he ships the turn to Eric. Eric has a Plains, and pays enough for an Inspiring Statuary. He passes after it resolves. I've got a forest return, and add some fuel to the fire with a Vernal Bloom. This will help 3 of the 4 decks at the table, which I think is kind of funny, and I then cast an Amulet of Vigor. Kuzno has an island return, and then plays his own Group Hug card with Rites of Flourishing. He gives me the draw with Miss Bumbleflower, and pumps her with a +1/+1 counter. He then plays Propaganda, giving Eric the draw this time, and gives Miss Bumbleflower another counter, draws a card, and also she gains flying. He then moves to combat, and hits me for 3. Desmond draws his extra card from the rights, and then uses the library trigger. He keeps all of the cards, taking the full 8, and he then plays a forest, and then another forest. He then pays 1 green for a Heritage Druid, floating a green left from tapping a forest, and uses that to help cast a Wirewood Channeler. Desmond then taps 3 elves on the field to use Heritage Druid's ability, making 3 more mana, and uses that to cast a Reclamation Sage. As the Sage comes in, he targets my Vernal Bloom, and floats 2 green from his overgrown tomb before it's destroyed. Desmond then uses that floating mana for a Cryptolith Rite, and he passes, going to find some dice because he shortcutted all that, and needs to put +1/+1 counters onto his elves as they enter from Arwen. Eric draws and plays a Fetid Heath, and then a Command Tower as his lands return. He then pays 3 for an Urza's Incubator, naming angels. Going to combat, he hits Desmond for 2 with Giada. In his second main phase, Eric then casts Drana and Linvala, who gain a +1/+1 counter from Giada as they enter, and also shut down most of the activated abilities on the board. I draw my cards, and play out a Riveteer's Overlook, sacrificing it and gaining 1, and going to find a forest. And the land from the Outlook gets to come in untapped because of the Amulet of Vigor. I then play a Ghost Quarter as my second land for turn. I then cast Loot, but have no extra lands to play. I do cast Threats Undetected, and go into my library to find Nissa, Lotus Cobra, Scoot Swarm, and an Ancient Green Warden. I have Kuzno pick, and he gives me Nissa and the Cobra, and has me shuffle back in the Ancient Green Warden and the Scoot Swarm. Kuzno draws his extra card for turn, but has no land to play. He casts a Smothering Tithe, and gives Eric the draw from Miss Bumbleflower. He then goes to combat, swinging his commander at Eric. Eric blocks with Dran and Linvala, and they just bounce off each other before Kuzno passes turn. Desmond draws his extra card from the rights, and uses the library ability, which he announces he'll not pay for, so Kuzno gains 4 treasures. Desmond doesn't want to lose any life though, putting 2 cards back, and he then floats a green from a forest. He then plays a Golgari Rot Farm, bouncing said forest back to his hand, and then replays it as his second land for turn. 5 mana is then tapped for a coat of arms, and the board gets bigger, with loot funnily enough being pumped because it shares a creature type with Arwen. With nothing else, he passes. Eric draws his 2, letting Kuzno get his treasures. And he then goes at Desmond with both angels, dealing 8. 4 mana is then tapped, partly from artifacts thanks to Improvise, and Eric casts a Witch Enchanter. It enters, and he targets the Smothering Tithe to destroy it. Eric then plays a tapped Shine Shadow Snarl. He then takes 3 as he plays an untapped Fell Mire, and he then taps Drana and Linvala to use the Wirewood Channeler's ability, making 4 mana. He then taps enough of his remaining lands to help cast Shilgengar, but Kuzno responds with the commander on the stack. He flashes in Solitude, giving me the draw from his Bumbleflower, and then targets to exile Drana and Linvala. With that targeting on the stack, Eric responds by casting an Eerie Interlude to try and blink out his board. With that on the stack, Kuzno then responds by casting a Stroke of Midnight, this time targeting the Witch Enchanter to deny Eric the second ETB trigger. He also gets his second Miss Bumbleflower trigger, having Desmond draw a card, and so does he. The Stroke of Midnight then resolves, and then the Eerie Interlude with the Angels getting exiled. Shilgengar then resolves as well. Eric then goes to his end step, and the Angels come back, with Drana and Linvala once more gaining a +1/+1 counter from Giada. My turn has me drawing my 2, and I play with the Lotus Cobra, and then play an Evolving Wilds. This has me gaining a mana, and I sacrifice the Wilds to go and find another basic, which makes me another mana, and also gets to come in untapped because of the amulet. I then float a green from a forest, and use my own Ghost Quarter to destroy it. This has me grabbing another forest, which comes in untapped, and makes me another floating mana from the Cobra. I then use some of that floating mana for Nissa, and once she resolves, cast a Splendid Reclamation. I bring back 6 of my lands, floating a total of 12 mana between Nissa and the Cobra, and then resolve the second half of Nissa's ability, revealing until I hit an elemental. I end up going pretty deep, revealing until I hit Titania. I then sacrifice the 2 New Capenna basic finds, and I gain 2 and find 2 more forests, which come in untapped and gain me 4 more floating mana. I then sacrifice the Evolving Wilds again, going to make 2 more mana. I use that mana to cast Lignify and enchant it onto Drana and Linvala, but Eric is too quick, sacrificing them to Shilgengar and making 6 blood tokens instead. I then activate Loot, and I get to reveal my top 6, keeping a tireless tracker. I then use a bunch of mana to cast Last March of the Ents, drawing 7 cards because Nissa is pumped by Desmond's board. I then put out a Rampaging Baloth, and the Titania I'd revealed earlier. My third land for turn is a Broker's Hideout, and once more I sacrifice it, gain 1, and go and find a forest. And to save some time, I once more sacrifice the Ghost Quarter to take out a forest after floating a mana to find another one. They come into play untapped thanks to the amulet, and I float even more mana from the Cobra and Nissa. I also gain some life from Titania seeing the lands hit the graveyard, and gain some clue tokens from the tracker, plus some beast tokens from the Rampaging Baloth, which is frankly a lot to keep track of, even as I'm narrating it. I then cast a Soul Ring, and follow up with a Shamanic Revelation, gaining 16 life, and drawing 8 cards. One of those 8 is a Concordant Crossroads, and I then cast Beast Within and blow up Propaganda on Kuzno's side. I then paste 6 mana into a Genesis Wave, revealing my top 6 cards. I hit some really good ones, but unfortunately only get to keep Lumra and the Seer's Sundial. With Lumra coming in, I then mill my top 4, but hit no lands, but the second ability doesn't care, bringing back all of the other lands in my graveyard to the battlefield at least. This has me then making 12 more floating mana, which jumps up even higher as I sacrifice the New Capenna fetches again, gaining even more life to find even more forests. I also gain a bunch of life from Titania, and almost run out of basics at this point. This also makes me a bunch of clues and beast tokens as well. I then pay 10 mana to draw 5 cards with the Sundial landfall triggers, and once those are done, I cast Azusa. With her out, this lets me play a Forest and a Lotus Field, gaining more life and more mana as they come in, plus tokens. I then pay the 4 to draw twice thanks to the Sundial, finally finding and casting Craterhoof. At this point it's well enough to take out the board in one go, and I win the game at exactly 35 minutes. I move on to the next one. Game review time. This game was quite quick at only 35 minutes exactly, which is kind of fun to end on. And yeah, I was playing Desmond's loot deck. I don't think any of us were expecting it to go off as well as it did, especially that last turn, but here we are. Apparently lands coming into play untapped is very good, so I'd say the MVP for this game was the Amulet of Vigor. It, coupled with the fact that I had Nissa and the Lotus Cobra out, meant that every land that came in was basically guaranteeing me 3 mana, was just wild. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.